Okay, so it's like 5:15 on the last day, so I think you guys want to see a whole bunch of code, right? Yeah, great. Okay, no, I won't do that. I'm going to be kind of talking about code, but I won't show it. This is pictures. Hi, I'm Andy. I drove up from Boston. I live kind of by this Harvard Square turkey. I don't know if turkeys are a thing for Thanksgiving here, but this is the best I could do. I work with Axis Maps, and I'm going to start this one with I wasn't at ICC in July, but I saw some people on Twitter quoting Tom Patterson in his talk there, saying that anything you can imagine you can do now, and this is the best time to be a cartographer. And this is perfect because I'm going to sort of show a little personal project journey that actually starts with Tom's work, and kind of gets me to this point of being like, yeah, you can do anything these days. So it goes back. First step, Tom Patterson published a techniques piece in CP 20 years ago on doing shaded relief in Photoshop, and you can still find this online. I came to it probably about 10 years after that, and even at that point, there's a big red note that says in 2004, I think, that he had been not doing this for years already. But it still works. You can pretty much, I think maybe, something may be in a different menu now, but all this stuff you can still do in the current Photoshop. And it was this process of taking a blue blank screen, apparently. Well, there's supposed to be a grayscale, DEM image elevation where dark is low and white is high. Going from that and all in Photoshop to making a shaded relief image like this is the one I did. There's a little more here. I think I threw on an extra land cover layer. But this was like an amazing thing for me to be able to make this kind of nice looking map in a design software, and I didn't have to use GIS. That was incredible and freeing. So I loved following that tutorial. I still do it once in a while. But on to step 2. At some point I realized, well, these elevation models, they're just a bunch of numbers, right? You can calculate this stuff. Pick up my favorite cartography textbook, and there's some really straightforward math in there about going pixel by pixel and calculating luminance or whatever it's called. And okay, so I wanted to try that. At the time, we're way into Flash. I would not remember how to use Flash anymore, but you could draw these, what were they, bitmap images or something they were called. So I wrote a bunch of code to do that math that was described there, and the same thing, start with this grayscale image and end up with a little shaded relief map. This is colored also with tinting, so that was fun. A few years later then, did the same thing in JavaScript with canvas elements, and this is stuff that I continue to kind of mess with to this day, which is what the other pictures in this talk will be. Okay, so I had was doing all kinds of little calculations on elevations and figuring out slopes and aspect. So what else can you do? I wanted to try hashures because they look really, really nice. Most of you are probably familiar. I don't have a picture of them, but that shading technique where you have lines going along the slope, sort of perpendicular to contour lines. They look really nice. They're kind of not in fashion these days, but they're great. So I ended up with this thing, which is not that, but it's where I ended up. And it's this kind of grassy-looking, fuzzy thing. But this is just a process of continuing to just mess with stuff that I was enjoying doing. It started with, you can kind of make a grid across the image and make a little stroke that shows the direction of the slope at that point. This is something that Mike Migursky and also Eric Fisher had kind of done some similar ones to that. And well, that looks too rigid, so maybe throw some random offsets in there. So that's the second slice there. They're a little more organic. And then, okay, go nuts and draw really long strokes, throw some curves in there, and then you just get this effect that I thought is not at all what I started with, what was intending to do, but it came out cool, I think. Like this map, I want to touch it, but all that does is get smudges on my screen, unfortunately. And this is just another example of that. I am flashing through these, but if you really want to see the details on this and the code behind it, those links in here are online, and the link to these slides will be will be there too. This is in the, of course, all those images I was showing before, if you don't recognize it, that's the island of Molokai in Hawaii. Really good example, I think, for showing like nice relief maps. This is in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, where I find myself a lot lately. Not sure exactly where. Anyway, so I've got a bunch of pictures like this. And then, I don't know, I still want to mess around with terrain and coding things. Well, I've got the slopes and directions and all that. So next is animation. And I did this thing, which is just as if you threw a bunch of water on this map and where might it flow. And it's basically doing the same math, it's just displaying it in a different way. Just an exploratory thing for myself. I also graduated to using not these grayscale images, which can only show 256 unique values, to these MapZen elevation tiles. I think Mapbox has these as well, that they look like this and encode much more elevation data by using at least three color channels. And you can just do a little conversion between the color and what that elevation would be. And I also used, if you saw the shading behind it, their terrain, like GL renderer, which is cool. I was going to show the real thing, but since I'd have to load it, maybe I won't. I can later if there's time. Which, of course, actually, that's all I have. Because next step, I don't know. But I like doing this kind of thing. It just brings me to this idea of like hand coding your maps. You can do kind of whatever you want. Like if you're not afraid to just get in on like a canvas or whatever and just mess around pixel by pixel even, you really do some fun things. So that is as close as a point as I have to anything. So that's all I got. I would encourage you to just play around like that.